Oh, okay, folks. Mark here again, cooking books, bringing information. So, I did a video about thoughts, like what is a thought, and I want to continue discussing that. And I want us to really let us see if we can, get a greater understanding of what a thought is and what it isn't. Because I believe if we can draw a well marked out, well defined a well developed definition or meaning, or some kind of you know, semantic, not just semantics, but a well defined, well developed, well cultivated, well, laid out explanation of what a thought is and what it isn't. I think it's safe to say we will make a quantum of a leap into our future, right? Into our future. If we can get a greater understanding of what thoughts are, what it isn't, what a thought is and what it isn't, I think we will have made a quantum of a leap into our next cycle of this human experiment that experience that we're having, or our experiment. So I want to use analogies, right? I want to use some analogies. So when I think of a thought, like when I think of, first of all, we got to ask ourselves, where do thoughts come from? And I mentioned this before in my previous video. Thoughts come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, right? And I'll tell you in a second why I say so. I want us Hermes Trismegistus. I always get a hard time saying that last name. I think that's how you say the name, by the way. Hermes Trismegistus is famously known for quoting. Is famously known for quoting, "As above, so below." Right? As above, so below. As within, so without. You guys can research that. I believe his name is Hermes Trismegistus. Please forgive me if I messed up the last name. It's Greek, so it's it's not a name that I can pronounce very well. But Hermes Trismegistus is famously known for quoting, "As above, so below. As within, so without." Why do I say that? Because I believe that over the years, our technological advancements, we have actually answered a lot of these questions to what, who, how, why, who are we? What are we? How are we? Why are we? I think those questions, that the age old questions that keeps men up at night and riddles and mystifies and bewilders and complex the minds of men, have been answered. We've answered a lot of the questions in terms of our technological advancements, right? And one of the answers is, "As within, so without." Is, if you look at, let's start by looking at our brain, and let's start by saying, as the brain within, the organ within, right? And the mind. What is the brain and what is the mind? Is the mind the brain? Is the brain the mind? Are they one of the same? Are they separate entities? That's something we need to figure out. And I've come to the realization, rationalization, that the mind is a distinct entity from the brain. Many will say they're one and the same, but they're actually very distinct. Why? The brain is an actual organ that can be felt, it can be touched, it can be operated on. The mind is immaterial. It does not have matter. It does not. It's not consist of matter as you know it. It is a formless substance, or formless in its nature. Now, why do I bring up "as above, so below, as within, so without"? Because the things that we have created technological wise have given us answers to what's within. So, what is the mind, right? Where do we see the mind in our technology, in our inventions, right? In our creations? Let's look at a computer, right? So let's use the brain. The brain is analogous of a computer. The computer is analogous of a brain. The brain represents the computer. The computer represents the brain. The chicken or the egg, which comes first? That's up to you. But the point that I'm making is that a computer has a USB, right? And you store information. You store information. You have a memory drive, and you store information. Well, the brain has what's called a hippocampus. The hippocampus is the USB for the computer. So the USB would be representative of a hippocampus. The hippocampus is the storage capacity of the brain. It's memory. It stores memory. That's where memories are filed. Information, data is collected and stored in the brain's hippocampus. The computer is the hard drive. The brain is the hard drive. Uh, but let's take it one step further. Again, as within, so without. So we see within the brain, we have the hippocampus, which is responsible for the filing, collecting of data and storage of information. And we see without, we have a computer that has a USB that is responsible for the filing, storing, and collecting of information. Now, so the brain would be considered the hard drive. What would be what wouldn't be the hard drive, right? What wouldn't be the hard drive for the computer is what's called cloud computing. And I think this is very fascinating stuff, folks. Stay with me here. Cloud computing, right? It is a way in this period and day and time that we're in. It's a way that men have found a way in terms of technology to store information externally from the computer. So rather than having a localized server, which is within the hard drive, they've figured out how they can use a network of servers that is operated by a company. So a company runs a network of servers that is external from your computer, and information, emails, all your data is stored in what's called the cloud computing. And it's called the cloud again because it is external from the computer, the hard drive. And it is always on, being provided and monitored by a company, and it is always on. So at any moment, if you run a business, you can be anywhere. Once you have your device, you can always, provided you have connection, you can always get on the cloud and retrieve whatever information you want to retrieve. Now, as within, so without. So that is without. What is that on within us? Because the universe the universe exists within us. Well, I'll talk about that in a second. What I mean by the universe exists within us is everything in the universe is mirrored. It's mirrored within us. For instance, the solar system has 9 planets, right? The sun, and then you have 8 that orbits it, right? Then we see within us, we have an atom. Your atom has a nucleus. Inside of your nucleus, you have your protons, and outside of the nucleus, you have the electrons, and the electrons orbit the nucleus no different than the 8 planets orbits the sun. So the solar system, and if you study subatomic particles and you see how the atom is structured, you'll see it's structured just like the solar system. And I think clearly based off evidence that is an example as above, so below, as within, so without. So if we study our biology, our anatomy, if we study our science, we'll see a lot of what's outside in our world within our biology. So that's why when you look at cloud computing and you say, okay, so the cloud, what would that be representative, or what would that be analogous to in terms of you and I? We know the brain is the hardware. The brain would represent the computer. So what would cloud represent? The cloud represents, in my research, in my opinion, this is purely my opinion, purely speculative. This is highly theoretical and highly philosophical, right? This is my research and what's come to me as I see it. I believe the cloud would represent our minds. So the brain, the computer represents the brain, as within, so without. Stay along those lines. The computer represents the brain, right? The cloud would represent the mind, because the cloud is external from the actual hardware, the actual computer. It's everywhere at all times. It's always on, and there's information constantly being stored in the cloud. And the cloud can be infected with viruses, bugs, and the company that runs the cloud can clean it out because they're constantly monitoring it. So your mind would be, the cloud would be symbolic of the mind. The mind is separate from the brain, and your mind stores information. Now I'm starting to get somewhere. So I'm thinking, okay, so I'm starting to see, what is the mind? The mind is a separate entity from the brain that is non-material, just like the cloud is non-material. It is not a hardware. The mind is always on, just like the cloud is always on. You can turn your computer off, your cloud is always on, provided it's being run by a company. Your mind is always on. This is why when you sleep, you dream. And we'll talk about sleep in another video. I don't want to talk about it. I did it before. I talked about REM sleep and all of this. So your mind never sleeps. This is why you dream. Your body sleeps because your body is a physical entity that needs rest. It needs to be recharged. Your mind doesn't sleep. This is why you have dreams. But be that as that may be, so I'm starting to pinpoint, okay, so cloud computing represents the mind. The mind is cloud computing, as within, so without. The brain is the computer is the brain, as within, so without. The hippocampus is the storage of the USB. The USB is the storage of the, as within, with. Okay, so I'm starting to get somewhere. We're starting to see, I'm starting to get some lucidity here, right? Things are starting to become lucid, very crystal and clear. So I said, okay. Then what is a thought? What is a thought again, right? What is the thought? Well, I spoke about this in my last video, but I kind of want to touch on it again, emphasize it, and emphatically speak on it. I am one of the opinion that your radio station has a broadcasting system. The broadcasting system modulates, right? It modulates information onto what's called a carrier wave. That carrier wave is everywhere and anywhere, right? Carrier wave is everywhere and anywhere, right? So this is why when you're driving, you can be driving, once you're in that localization, you're in a certain geographical area, you pick up a certain wave at all times. And it doesn't matter what time, wherever you are, provided the broadcasting station covers a certain geography. You're anywhere within that geography, you're going to pick up that wave, that carrier wave. Now that carrier wave, all that carrier wave is frequency. It's energy. That's all it is. Vibrated at a certain rate. And the carrier wave is transmitted via the broadcasting station. And again, before it's transmitted, it is modulated. Modulated simply means it is altered. It is altered with music. Yes, altered, modified, modulated, right. Modulated means to be altered on a signal or a carrier wave, right. And the altering just simply means that the music is being codified. Codified, again, is just a fancy way of saying being coded into the carrier wave. And once that wave is transmitted, the radio picks it up, and then it goes through the process of demodulation, which is the extraction of the information and or data that has been codified or modulated in that wave. And you and I get the sound, the music, and we enjoy it. We dance, we sing, we rock to it, we clap, whatever it may be. So I'm saying, aha, as within was so without again. So if that is how if that's how it's illustrated, right? That is how a physical man-made radio wave is transmitted and received and modulated and demodulated and brought to reality, right? Then, or manifested, then the radio is the processor. Your brain is a processor. A computer is a processor. Your brain is a processor. And the brain interprets, it extracts, and it executes according to the signal being fed into it. So then I thought, okay, so then a thought, therein lies the answer to a thought. A thought is nothing more or less than a radio wave. It's a frequency. And that thought, like the radio wave, has a certain amount of information. Each thought carries within it information. Just like your DNA, each gene, right, carries within it a certain amount of information. And that information is expressed, whether it's dominant or recessive. That information can be recessive or dominant, but that information is expressed as a protein. And that's all we are, a lump sum of protein that vibrates at a certain frequency and held together by bonds, various bonds, hydronic bonds, hydrogen bonds, ionic bonds, covalent bonds. That's what keeps us all together, vibratory bonds. But we're all just a lump sum of mass, and that mass is proteins that have been expressed in the forms and expressed as a result of genes. So I am nothing more or less than one big gene that has been fully expressed and then developed through a process of evolution and time. Now, the interesting thing, though, is this. So a thought is nothing more or less than a radio wave. I'm going to use a radio wave again, as within, so without. And the radio wave is symbolic. It's emblematic. It's purely a token of what we're trying to convey here. That a thought is a radio wave, not in a literal sense, but in a metaphorical or allegorical, so that we can get a vivid comprehension and apprehend what's being discussed. So a thought is analogous to a radio wave, and each of us have what's called a magnetic field, and each of us, I mentioned this before, like a fish, we swim in a pool or a reservoir of potentials. Potentials are those thoughts, because a potential simply means something that can become, have the potential, has the capability, the possibility to become. Your thought is a potential because it has the possibility, like the gene, to be expressed. And the only way it can be expressed is by means of being received, by being interpreted, and being executed by the processor, which is the brain. Then transmits that thought to the CNS, central nervous system, the ANS, autonomic nervous system, and we behave accordingly to that thought. So a thought is information codified on a carrier wave, using the analogy of a radio wave, and it is being fed by means of it's being fed as an electrical signal into our cloud. Right. So a thought is a radio wave being fed into our cloud. Again, our cloud represents our minds. And the mind, like the cloud, stores a plethora of information waiting to be extracted and interpreted and executed. So this is some fascinating things that I'm coming across and I'm starting to understand. So therefore, the takeaway, or if I can say a conclusion, is that, and this is again highly philosophical, highly speculative. I'm sure there's a lot of people that will disagree, but this is not. This is my reasoning. This is purely my result, a result of my research, my studying, my due diligence, my scrutinizing, my never-ending, unyielding, unceasing thirst for knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. This is what has brought me, and I believe thoroughly. I'm convinced that I'm right. I am very convinced. I know I'll have people to disagree, but I'm convinced that I'm onto something, and I will at least be making quantum leaps and bounds into my future with this new, I wouldn't say new, but this dawning, this, revelation, or this epiphany that I'm having here. But so I think that, based off my research again, so our thoughts are not our thoughts. They're not. No different than the carrier wave that's been transmitted to the radio. It's not the radios. Those waves do not belong to the radio. No different than your thoughts do not belong to you. You have think of a radio sitting right here in front of us. You turn it on to a particular station and you have the music, okay? That music that you're hearing does not belong to the radio. The music is the end product or end result of a demodulation or demodulated or decodifying of a signal that was modulated or codified into a carrier wave and transmitted to that radio, and that radio processed it, interpreted it, executed, and released the sounds in the song. But that song that you're hearing is no more belonging to the radio than your thoughts belong to you. Your thoughts are not your thoughts. And again, this is a very controversial thing, but if you study Isaiah, I forgot the exact chapter, you can Google, research it, look it up, get your Bible. It says, my thoughts are not your thoughts are not my thoughts. As far as the heavens are from the earth, so are your ways from my ways, etc., etc., etc. This is God speaking to the people, saying that his thoughts are not yours. Yours are not his. And that led me on my quest of what is a thought. And here I am, still researching, still studying. I will continue to do so until I find more. And if I find more information, more gems, I will continue to mine the ocean of knowledge until I deep sea dive until I find something, and I will share with you guys. So I'm of the opinion in my conclusions that our thoughts are not ours. They're not ours. No more than the radio waves being transmitted to the radio from the broadcasting station. It's not the radios, the literal radios. So our thoughts are not ours, folks. Our thoughts are nothing more, nothing less than a signal that is being transmitted from some, universal power, universal mind, some collective universe, collective power. Our thoughts are not ours. Our thoughts are being transmitted to us from a broadcasting station. We're going to use the broadcasting station. It's emblematic. Again, it's a token. It's metaphoric. It represents. It's a representative. It's analogous. So our thoughts are being transmitted to us, fed to us by means of carrier waves. And those thoughts are being stored in our cloud, which is the mind, right? Stay with me here. And just like the cloud computing, the cloud computing is always on. It's everywhere, and at any moment you can extract a file, some kind of information that's been stored in email or whatever it may be, for you to perform a task, your business or whatever. Well, in the same sense, at any time, there's information being stored in your cloud, in my cloud, which is the mind. And at any moment, we can all tap into this reservoir of information and extract and pull out and utilize. And depending on the task at hand, we can go to the archives of the cloud computing, aka the mind, and withdraw or obtain the information that we need. So yeah, I am pretty convinced that this is how it goes, something like that. Even if I'm not 100% right, it goes something like that. And if we can, so the usefulness. Here's the usefulness now. Here's the practicality of this, right? Here's how we become practical and useful. When a thought comes into your cloud computing, when a thought penetrates your cloud computing, the mind, you have a choice as to whether that thought becomes expressed like the gene, whether it becomes manifest, whether it becomes realized, materialized, or rejected. We need to let that sink in. Of all that I've said in this video, let that dawn on us the most, that when a thought comes in, it is up to us whether to accept it or to reject it. So the takeaway is to first know this and know this well. Disidentify yourselves from the thoughts. I'll say it again. The takeaway that I hope that we can all, whether we disagree or agree, I hope we can all agree on this takeaway. Disidentify thyself from thy thoughts. Again, I'll say it one more time. Learn the subtle nuance. It's nuanced, it's subtle. Learn the nuance and subtleties of the disidentification between the I, which is the you, the being, the spirit, who you are. Learn the disassociation, disidentification of who you are, independent of the thought itself. Because if you say, these are my thoughts, that is a correct statement. These are my thoughts. You can erase the word thoughts and put, these are my cars, these are my shoes, these are my pens, these are my car keys. We can continue all night. The moral of what I'm saying is this. Everything we just said, these are mine, these are mine, these are mine, they were all distinct from you. They weren't you. These are my car keys. These are my shoes. The shoes is distinct from me. My car keys is separate from me. These are my pens. These are my highlighters. These are my notes. These are my books. All these things are separate from me, the person. And I want us to get that these are my thoughts. Same rule applies. Separate from the person. You are not your thoughts. Your thoughts they belong to you in the same way this highlighter belongs to me. It's my possession. It's in my possession. I bought this pen, so I own it. I bought my books, so I own it. I bought, my vitamins, so I own it. You know, I bought like these. I bought my computer, so I own. My thoughts are mine in the exact same sense. I own, but they are not me. And we need to learn to disidentify ourselves from the thoughts, so that when a crazy thought is transmitted to your brain, into your head, a kooky weirdo, you know, if you're not aware that it's not you, that thought will manifest itself in your behavior and in your personality, and it becomes you. And now you are that thought. And you will find it virtually impossible to extricate yourself from that thought, because that thought has completely enveloped, engrossed your person, your being, and has become one with you. And now you function as one, and therefore you are that thought. But never let that thought get so deeply rooted in your being that you no longer can disidentify and disassociate the two. It's always important to be able to disidentify and disassociate, so this way you're able to stay centered and grounded no matter what. You know who you are at this point. No matter what's being fed, transmitted, signal, subliminally or otherwise, you will be able to disidentify and know who you are. Till next time, Mark, Cooking Books. Peace.